What prevented Zacchaeus from seeing Jesus, and what prevents us from following him? In this series, we're discovering what it means to be a disciple, and to do this, we're using the encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus as our blueprint. In this episode, we are going to explore why Zacchaeus had difficulty seeing Jesus, and it's not necessarily because he was a short little man. Hello, I'm Remo Bierdepoot from Caleb's Journal, where we explore the Bible in search of practical applications for expressing the kingdom of God in our lives today. To accompany this series, we've created a free downloadable study guide that you can access by clicking on the link in the description box below. So let's get started. When we read the account of Zacchaeus, it is common to think that this man is short and that his lack of height made it difficult for him to see Jesus. However, you may be surprised to hear that Zacchaeus was not necessarily a short man. Let's see if we can find the real reason why Zacchaeus couldn't see, and then implement what we learn in our lives today. In verses 1 to 3 of Luke chapter 19, we read, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd could not, because he was small in stature. So from these three verses, we discover three things about Zacchaeus. Firstly, he is a chief tax collector and is rich. Secondly, he is seeking Jesus. And thirdly, he can't see Jesus, apparently because of the crowd, and that he is short. I find it interesting that it is Zacchaeus who is the one who is doing the seeking. To me, this expresses the idea that on some level, Zacchaeus is not satisfied with his current position in life. Something is missing. Even though he has great wealth, he is not fulfilled. He has a desire to change, and this desire is expressed through the act of seeking to find out who this Jesus is that is passing through his town. However, Zacchaeus is unable to see him, even though he desires to. Why is this? Verse 3 tells us it is because of the crowd and that he is short in stature. This paints a picture that Zacchaeus is a short person. The crowd that is milling around as Jesus enters Jericho is blocking Zacchaeus' view. This all makes perfect sense. Zacchaeus just appears to be unlucky. He can't see Jesus because of his height, something which he certainly has no control over. It's genetic. His inability to see Jesus appears to be no fault of his own. But is that really so? Or could there be another explanation? Let's see if Zacchaeus really was a short man. The Greek word translated as stature in verse 3 is the word halakia. So Zacchaeus is short in halakia. Halakia has three possible meanings. It can refer to one's age, one's height, or one's social standing. Now it's unlikely that halakia in this verse would refer to Zacchaeus' age. He would not have been a young man given that he had the position of chief tax collector. It can indeed revert to Zacchaeus' height. He could have been a short man. However, what appears to be most interesting possibility is that Zacchaeus was a man of low social standing. He was a rich man. And as a rich man, you would expect to be at the front of the crowd, in the place of honour. You wouldn't expect that a man with high social standing is pushed to the back of the crowd. But this is where we find Zacchaeus, at the back of the crowd, even though he is rich. So what could be the cause of this discrepancy? What is the scandal that has resulted in Zacchaeus' low social status? He is identified as a tax collector, and not just any tax collector. He is the chief tax collector, the only chief tax collector that is mentioned in the entire Bible. Now, tax collectors had a special place in the culture of the first century. These people were despised. They were classed amongst the sinners of society, the worst of the sinners. This would explain Zacchaeus' low social status and why, despite his wealth, we find him at the back of the crowd. We now have a clearer picture of Zacchaeus emerging. He is a man who is dissatisfied with his current status in life. He recognizes that something is missing, and this expresses itself in a desire to see who Jesus is. However, he is unable to see him. He can't see who Jesus is because of what he himself is, a sinner. Ultimately, it is his sin which is separating himself from Jesus, and he is therefore unable to see him. But why were tax collectors considered to be such great sinners in the first century? And how does this relate to our own status as sinners today? To answer these questions, we will need to understand something about taxation in the first century. During this time, Judea was under the control of the Roman Empire. The inhabitants of Judea therefore paid taxes to two separate authorities. Firstly, they would pay the temple tax and a tithe of their crops to the temple in Jerusalem. These payments were mandated by the Torah and were used to maintain the country's religious and civil administration. In addition to these payments, the people would also be required to pay taxes to Rome. Rome itself was overpopulated and underemployed. It required the resources from its external provinces to support the empire and survive. Each conquered province would be assessed according to its revenue potential, and the province's governor would be responsible for ensuring that this revenue was collected. The governor would use a system known as tax farming to collect this revenue. Tax farming involved putting out to tender the position of chief tax collector. The successful applicant would guarantee the payment the governor required. The chief tax collector would then receive Rome's backing and would hire underlings to extract the taxes from the people. Any amount collected above the amount payable to Rome would be the tax collector's profit. This system naturally led itself to corruption, and a very heavy burden was laid on the people, a burden that has been estimated at between 50 to 80%. However, even though tax collectors were oppressors, and many people suffered because of their corrupt practices, it is not oppression which lies at the core of their sin. And to find this out, we will need to dig a little bit deeper. By collecting the taxes for Rome, the authority of Rome was being validated. But what did the authority of Rome represent? And what was the claim that the collection of taxes was validating? Let's take a short history lesson. Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, and 2 years later, he was deified by the Roman Senate. His adopted son Octavian became known as the Son of God, and he took to this title with gusto. The years surrounding the assassination of Julius Caesar were a period of great instability and civil war, which only ended in 27 BC when Octavian ascended to the throne. Octavian's ascension to the throne marked the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. As Rome's first emperor, he took on the title of Caesar Augustus. With no separation of powers between church and state, not only was Caesar Augustus considered to be the Son of God, he was also the high priest. His rise to power inaugurated a period of stability which would last 200 years and be known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. The propaganda department of Augustus's court sprung into action. His historians and poets masterfully retold the story of Roman history. History had reached its climax. A new golden age had dawned with the birth of a child who would spread peace and prosperity to the entire world. The messaging was clear. This is the good news, or the gospel, of Caesar. The age that we have all waited for and eagerly anticipated is now here. We have an emperor. Peace, justice, security and prosperity are ours. The Son of God has become the King of the world. Octavian died in 14 AD, and the title of Caesar Augustus transferred to Tiberius, who was the Caesar when the encounter between Zacchaeus and Jesus occurred. So the rise of the Caesars coincides with the growing expectation in Judea of the birth of a Messiah and his imminent arrival, he being the true Son of God. So we have two competing ideologies. By being the chief tax collector, Zacchaeus is not only oppressing his fellow countrymen, which is bad enough, but he is also enforcing their validation of Caesar's claim that he is God. Zacchaeus is enforcing his countrymen's rejection of the God of Israel and God's sovereign claim over his land and over his people. Zacchaeus does not only defraud his own countrymen, he defrauds his own God. By his actions, Zacchaeus is seeking to validate the ideology that man, illustrated in this case by Caesar and the power of Rome, is sovereign over God. This is a sin that can trace its origin all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus not because he was short, but because his eyes were fixed on another God. His sin, not his height, is what separates him from Jesus. In effect, his sin blinded him. All sin blinds us from God because at its root, it is a declaration of independence from God. It is a declaration of one's own sovereignty. It is a declaration that I am my own God, that I can do things my own way. The root of all sin is a rejection of the very first of the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Our sin prevents us from seeing who Jesus is, as our focus is on another God, which ultimately finds its expression in our own selves. If we can't see who Jesus is, it is impossible to follow him. And if we can't follow him, it is impossible to become like him. The most difficult question we can ask ourselves is, where are we placing ourselves before God? Where are we not trusting in him and instead relying on our own ability to fix it? We need to ask ourselves these questions at all levels of our society. Where am I not trusting and following God with my own personal struggles? Where am I not trusting and following God with my relationships? Where am I not trusting and following God in my interactions that I have with my community? Where I witness breakdown, where I witness the effects that result from a separation from God, to who do I turn to fix it? Who do I follow? And do I truly follow? These are deep and incredibly hard questions to ask, but so very important, as they will highlight to us where our blind spots are in our relationship with God and what is preventing us from being disciples of Jesus. In our next episode, we are going to see what Zacchaeus did to overcome his inability to see Jesus. He did something amazingly courageous. He climbed into a tree. Thanks for watching. We have prepared a free study guide to accompany this video. There is a link on screen to where you can download it, and it's also in the description box below. If you found this video helpful, then please share it with your family and friends and give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more videos like this, then please subscribe to our channel. Thank you, and we will see you in the next episode.